We're going into refugee advocacy conversation this hour. Kamuzinzi DEO is a refugee youth advocate, and Philip Ogonda is a project officer, advocacy, legal aid and governance pillar, Refugees Consortium of Kenya. And they are both our guests this hour coming into the Situation Room. Kamuzinzi, good morning. Philip, good morning to you as well.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Karibu sana. It's World Refugee Day 2025. That's today.
It's today.
And we're talking about solidarity with refugees, community as a superpower, and also then looking into the issues that form pacts when governments actually do take on refugees and what is supposed to happen. So thank you both of you for being here. Mm-hmm. And even as we welcome you to the show, as you sit in the hot seats of the Situation Room, Dennis is going to share today's proverb. We would like to get your insights or your interpretations of what that proverb is. Right.
Yeah, our proverb today comes from Rwanda, a land known as the land of 1,000 hills, you know. And it is also home to mountain gorillas. 50% of the world's population of mountain gorillas in Rwanda, and it is also home to one of Africa's Great Lakes, Lake Kivu, a population of around 13 million people. A lot to be said about the country that is considered to be one of the cleanest, not only in Africa, but the world over. The economy is growing really fast due to decisions and policies put in place by the government. And our proverb today, a tree planted by God is not uprooted by the wind. A tree planted by God is not uprooted by the wind.
Maybe I'll just start by saying I'm actually originally from Rwanda. So I'm happy to know that today's proverb comes from there. So with that, a tree planted by God cannot be uprooted by wind. Basically, God is a superior being and He's almighty. So that means there is aspect of power onto that. So definitely something that has the aspect of power and the entirety of God. It's basically strong. Basically, no man can just come and bring about changes that are not really stronger than that. So I feel like it's more or less on power. So something that has its power backed cannot just be messed up by anyone.
Indeed. What about you, Philip?
I think the game is rigged because he's from Rwanda. We should have given him a Kenyan proverb. But what it means, in my own interpretation, is that first things first, what matters, what God has ordained, everything else comes secondary to it. So that's the starting point, and then everything else now comes secondary to it.
Indeed. So I guess going into that, for everything then comes secondary. Going into that, some of the things that we talk about when we're forming nations, and we're not just dealing with the individuals or the communities that are natural to those nations only, and then the refugee issue comes into play. That for years on end, especially after issues of conflict, we then had individuals and communities who had to flee certain areas because of conflict, but not just conflict, who had to flee or had to leave where they're naturally known to because of other things like natural disasters such as famine, such as drought and famine that was just persistent. But the most common issue that we see that brings about the issues of refugees is conflict. And because of that, we have to see the great movement of persons from one place to another. After 1951, just to give a brief history towards this, is when nations, the League of Nations into the United Nations said, you know what, we have to deal with this problem, especially coming after the Second World War, and that there were people who had to move from where they were naturally born because of this conflict. And nations came together and they signed treaties and ratified them by saying that we will be welcoming of these individuals and we will give them status up to a certain place. That is, more or less where we are coming from to the place where we have refugees today. Now, in this region, Ethiopia being the largest taker of refugees. Kenya also being quite one with 2 huge refugee camps, one of which was, semi-closed and such like that. But we do have refugees, and the fight for status has been one that nations have been talking about for a very long time. Bringing us to the place whereby today we recognize World Refugee Day 2025. We'll be talking about some of those themes. But the question is, in terms of status, have we seen things change over time? And have we gotten to the place whereby it is an acceptable matter for us to discuss? We'll start with you, DEO.
I'll quickly say that and acknowledge whatever you said. Currently, we still have the largest crisis in terms of refugee management. One of the largest crises being ID and documentation. So, yes, there has been progress. I won't deny that there has been progress, even from the different agencies who work around that. But then we did, I'll speak for where I work. I work with youth versus community, and we did a research back then around a year and about, which was titled Future with Wakimbizi. And we realized that the biggest challenge in Kenya for refugees, one of the biggest challenges, documentation. And the process is still slow. We have refugees who have not gotten their refugee status still. They're still in the process, some even more than a year, more than 2 years. So we can say that there's progress, but there's still a lot that needs to be done in that regard.
Yeah, Philip. So we talk about refugees in the country, and there's a lot that goes into that, because now there is a refugee and asylum seeker. What's the difference? Because then again, one would just assume that everyone who's foreign the country and perhaps in the country hiding or running away from something is considered a refugee. But what's the difference between a refugee and an asylum seeker? As well as, let's just look at the laws that do exist to protect the refugees.
Yeah. So recently we've loosely called any foreigner that we see a refugee, and I will take this opportunity to just distinguish who are refugees, who are foreigners, who are migrants. So migration is basically just movement from one place to another one. So all these foreigners that we find in Kenya have moved from one place to another. But there's the difference between now people who've moved forcefully, victims of forced displacement, and then there's people who've moved voluntarily. These are the economic migrants, people who are probably searching for better opportunities, people who are searching for better education, people who are coming to Kenya to visit, probably tourists. And then now we have victims of forced displacement, the victims who are people who are fleeing from wars, people who are fleeing from natural disasters, things like tsunamis, earthquakes, and droughts, and things like that. And then we have also people who are fleeing from external aggression and foreign domination, and these are people who will be classified as forcibly displaced population. So when you look at a refugee now, when you look at all these people now, when you look at all these people who fall under forced migration, we have then internally displaced who have fled from either conflicts, from conflicts, from earthquakes and disasters, from environmental disasters, from displacement because of development issues, but then they haven't yet crossed an international border. But then we have people who, because of the same reasons, have fled their countries and then found their ways to a different country. So these people are then who we refer to as asylum seekers. So they're just seeking asylum protection in another state because their state has failed to protect them. So when you look at now, a refugee is then this asylum seeker who has undergone the entire now refugee status determination process, which is a rigorous process to determine whether one meets the definition of a refugee. And then after they've had that process sorted out through the Department of Refugee Services and had their status confirmed, then that person is then referred to as a refugee. So the convention, the 1951 convention, now defines a refugee as a person who is outside their country of origin, and owing to a well-founded fear, they are unable and unwilling to return to their country of origin because of either persecution on grounds of race, religion, membership of a particular social group or political opinion. Then we have so that's a difference between a refugee and asylum seeker. And then we also have a host community. Host community are these people who live around where refugees reside. So the UN gives guidelines as that to extend to a 50 kilometers radius, but Kenya has been gracious enough to extend the definition of a host community to people living in the counties where refugees are found. In terms of the laws governing refugee protection, globally we have the 1951 convention that was immediately formed to respond to the World War II. But then later they realized that the definition under the 1951 convention was very limited to people who are fleeing only the wars that had happened pre-1951. So that meant that any person who would be fleeing the Rwanda genocide, which happens after 1951, wouldn't be considered a refugee. So later in 1967, there was a protocol that was passed to remove that time limitation, so that everyone who is fleeing any war happening at any time, and anyone who is fleeing any war happening in any part of the world can meet the definition of a refugee. Nationally, we have in Africa, we have the 1969 OAU Convention that has just also taken into account the specific problems that Africa face in terms of displacement. And then so it has expanded definition to also include people who would be fleeing from armed militia, foreign occupation, and then also people who would be fleeing also from events that seriously disturb public order. And then locally, Kenya recently, in 2021, enacted the Refugees Act of 2021, which is progressive in terms of socio-economic inclusion. It also guides refugee protection and refugee management, and it has gone into aligning Kenya with the global standards.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, DEO, you are in the country from Rwanda, and one would ask the question, are you a refugee in Kenya, and what is the experience?
I'll speak into that and say I was born and raised in Kenya. So that brings about the conversation of we have parents, generally the refugees coming in from their host countries, and then we have the new generation of kids born in the refugees that they have fled in.
Okay.
Now that creates a two batch of people, you know. So the situation is I'm originally from Rwanda. My parents came in as refugees, and we were born here in Kenya. So that's my story. So basically, I was born, raised here, I went to school here, and for most of us, I'll actually speak to the children born in Kenya. They feel more Kenyan than refugees. But then the challenge comes in, especially when you transit from high school. You start now realizing, by the way, there are things which I cannot access. I cannot get help when I'm transiting maybe to universities and colleges. At times you feel like you're Kenyan, then you go to apply for the ID, you realize, by the way, I cannot get the Kenyan ID. Then there's always this assumption that when a child is born in Kenya, they are naturally Kenyans. And then I personally had that struggle, because I remember after high school, I went to the various offices trying to get the Kenyan ID, but then I was told that the process is vigorous. There are moments when I got misinformation, and that built up to my interest in becoming a refugee advocate up to date, because I realized there are so many challenges that the refugees go through, especially now the children. There's also that a lot of misconceptions and a lot of misinformation in exactly what can a kid born in Kenya from refugee parents access to. And also the community around us. I remember the community around us, they expect us to participate in everything that's Kenyan, because basically they assume that we are Kenyans, because even some of us, we can speak some of the local languages.
So what could you not do?
You cannot definitely you cannot get the Kenyan ID. That's for sure. but you can access some of these other services like education. The government has been kind to allow us to access education, health, and the different services. The other challenge is you can't just move around anyhowly. There is the matter of you getting a movement pass if you want to travel locally, and there is also the matter of you getting a passport. We call it the CTD passport. If in case you want to travel abroad in different countries, of course you cannot travel to your origin country for security matters. Also, we are able to access quite some services even with now the devolved government from the different counties. You can register businesses, as much as there is a challenge also into that, because the challenge of documentation still affects almost everything. Because if you don't have the right documentation, and we all know that in any institution, in every service provider, they always ask, where is your documentation, where is your ID? We have a few IDs a few documents which were gazetted by the government. But then we also have a challenge that the different service providers and institutions, they're not really capacitated to understand exactly what refugee documents are there. Some of them actually is just like an A4 paper, but it's a very powerful document. We call it the proof of registration.
Right.
Yeah.
So Philip, then how? Because from what he's saying, it's difficult for this documentation, and you've lived here all your life. Your parents come in as first generation refugees, and then of course got children. So we also know that states work together. I mean, there's the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. We know that is there, but then there are also other consortiums such as yours that come together to do this work. What are the stakeholder approaches to ensuring that some of these processes then are easier, and what activities are they involved in to see that at least status can be attained?
To begin with, refugee protection is multifaceted and also requires multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholder collaboration. So we have the government that has been given the primary role of refugee protection and refugee management, and that role has been given to the Department of Refugee Services, which is headed by the Commissioner, and that department is then what sorts their refugee registration issues, so the entire refugee status determination process. There's also documentation issues, and also just the process of just managing refugee affairs into the country. Then we also have the Refugee Advisory Committee that has also been established by the Refugees Act, that is made of different ministries, different representatives from different ministries, representatives from the COG, and then also representative from the UNHCR and DRS to just guide on to just give strategic guidance towards policies, towards refugee policies. And we've seen that they've recently in March 2025 recently gazetted also the Shirika plan. We also have the Refugee Status Appeals Committee that's supposed to hear the refugee appeals for people whose status have been denied and they believe that they should get. So in terms of also other stakeholders, we have the UNHCR that just comes in to support government in terms of also the obligation of managing refugees and also service delivery. We also have civil society like RCK, and other civil societies who come together through the NGO Refugee Working Group, and they've undertaken programs like empowering refugees through legal aid, civic education, advocacy on inclusion and non-discrimination, also through provision of services to refugees, and also things like advocacy, also policy advocacy for refugee inclusion. As RCK, we've been big, particularly on policy advocacy, and just to ensure, in line with our systematic goal change, that the policies and the plans and the various laws that come into place are responsive and are protective are protective and also are responsive to the needs of refugees. So we've been able to also work with the county governments, noting that also Refugee Protection is a concurrent faction with the devolved government also performing certain functions to just help them also collaborate in participatory approaches to ensure that also the plans they have for the counties, and especially with our letter of agreement with Turkana, that these legislations that come and these bills that come into place are also responsive and also include refugees. So we also have the private sector that is involved in also just opening up employment and entrepreneurship spaces for refugees, because we are realizing that with donor aids dwindling and funding getting cuts, we are moving to a space where we need refugees to be more and more self-reliant. So we also need the private sector to come into place in terms of providing, opening up entrepreneurial spaces, opening up employment opportunities and things like that. Then we also calling upon also the donor, and we also require the donor and UN agencies to also fund and integrate programs that benefit also both refugees and host communities, because we are also moving into a space where we need also host communities to be brought at par with also refugees. And then we have we also have refugee-led organizations. These are community-based organizations that have been formed and are run by refugees themselves, and they are also key in terms of also guiding policies and ensuring that also the policies that come to place reflect the lived realities and the lived realities and have the voice of the affected people also in place. So refugee-led organizations have also formed a very big part in terms of grassroots advocacy, policy advocacy, and things like that. And then we also have the host communities, the places where refugees live. They have welcomed these people into their society. They've lived with them. They've collaborated with them in community structures, in their churches, in their and through that they've been able to promote social cohesion. So I think that has been the role of the different stakeholders in refugee protection.
Okay, fine. There's work that the state will do. There's work that host nations will do. The policy number crunching continues. Treaties ratified, party to certain protocols also observed, and all of this. But then when we talk about community as a superpower, what are we saying exactly? Let's start with you, Philip.
What you're saying, so the theme for today's World Refugees Day is community as a superpower. So when we are talking about community as a superpower, we are talking about standing together with, in solidarity with refugees, not just about looking at them as mere placeholders, but recognizing the value they place in the society. Kenya has been for a long time known for its history of hosting refugees from the 90s, when most of our parents were taught by Ugandan refugee teachers, and to this time where we have refugees coming in, going into employment, employing other people. We have mothers raising children. We have students pursuing education and going up to take places into the economy and also building into the economy. So looking at refugees as a superpower is also recognizing the different strengths they hold, standing with them in solidarity and not just being sympathetic about their situation, also including them and not just merely not moving from a culture of where they've been invisible to a culture where they are included, moving from opportunities, from the obstacles that have been there to working to removing these systematic barriers and creating opportunities for refugees. So calling on to communities as a superpower, we are calling on to Kenyans to create a space where refugees are seen as equal partners in development and not as burdens, where refugee children can dream and learn and also grow like other children, and also where urban and also national development and country development also thinks about the refugee and also includes them into like planning and also include them into like planning and also development, and also creating a society where there's no discrimination, and we replace it with a place where we dialogue to also understand their situation and also just combat the negative narratives around refugees. So in playing your role in creating the community as a superpower, we then call on to Kenyans to educate themselves on refugee issues and speak out against misinformation. We also call on to Kenyans to also support refugee businesses, because some of these people are also just all of these people are also just working to, earn a living just like you and I, and then also just supporting their refugee businesses and also investing into their businesses. So solidarity is not just about charity, it's just about recognizing and treating them with the dignity they deserve.
Yeah. So DEO, when you talk about refugees in the country, the host communities play an integral part, because that is the people they deal with and engage with on a daily basis. And that means that the host communities then become front and center in the well-being of refugees in any given jurisdiction. So then how important is it for the host communities to understand that refugees have rights? They have rights to go to school under the Refugee Act to access healthcare, and that they are not there to compete as much as that is how it's looked at. How important is it for the host communities to embrace refugees within their communities?
It's really important since we all understand that on the durable solutions, integration is the one that's really working. I mean, and then since we are speaking on integration, even with the Shirika plan coming on board, we understand first of all the role that the refugee-led organizations play, like us, Youth Versus Community, since we are directly with the communities at grassroots levels, and then they are led by refugees, meaning that they have the lived experiences. And on that note, in terms of the role that integration would play into that, is that we don't really want, there's a general misconception that refugees are able to access all services as host communities, and then you'd speak to a Kenyan and they'll tell you that I thought you can actually do this. I thought a simple service like the driving license, they think that you can just get it anytime, but then with whatever document you have. But then at times it's really hard for refugees to access all these services. Some may be able to access these licenses and everything, but then helping and working closely with the host communities, because we've started conversations. We usually do so many community outreach programs, is all of us, and I'm aware even RCK, and these community outreach programs, they're done at the grassroots levels with the host community leaders, the Nyumba Kumis, the chiefs, basically just to help them understand deeply the refugees, so that we don't have these assumptions that refugees access whatever services available to them easily, as maybe the host communities are able to access these services. We also understand that there are challenges in the host community, and us living together, that means that when I lack salt in my house, it's my neighbor, a host community, who will aid me. When I don't have money to eat, they loan me some money, I loan them. Refugees also run businesses, and they're able to do a little bit of transactions. So there's that aspect of community, us living together at different areas, and when that is emphasized, then the host communities, we actually have host communities in our networks who are actually refugee advocates, who champion for refugee rights, who speak to other host communities leaders, even chiefs. Yesterday I was a chief from Woodley, Jamuhuri, and he's a refugee champion, and they do amazing works. They're able to tell other host community and leaders that actually, by the way, this is the real situation. situation in refugee, and refugee management cannot be left to the government alone. There is a role that the host communities also play, because even when it comes to even just understanding, because when a refugee comes to let me use Kenya, when they come to Kenya, the first challenge is language barrier. And so when they're going to buy something, a citizen will definitely understand who you see wa hapa nona, and then if they understand the challenges that refugees go through, the conversation becomes easy. The judgment becomes less. They quickly understand that they need help. So there's that importance, and we really emphasize it. We form networks with both community-based organizations that are run and led by the citizens themselves, and we also emphasize with the refugee-led organizations having even in their staff members from the host communities, so that we bring about integration wholesomely.
Do we find that there is an acceptance across board from community? Because we talk about community like it's this big thing over here, but community is made up of people. It's made up of units. It's made up of families. It's a student in school who was in school with you, DEO, or it is somebody who works in an office who was a teacher who worked with somebody that came in contact with your parents who were first generation refugees. So it's not an amorphous group of people. It is it's people like you and I, me, Dennis, Philip, DEO, in one room who come into contact. So when we talk about community, is there an acceptance? Because there's a policy, right?
Yes.
There's a policy, there's the protocol, it's on paper.
Yes.
But then there's the real thing, and that I think is the spirit of all of this thing that we talk about. That if there's a general acceptance across board of refugees and saying, hang on, these guys got the shorter end of the stick, because that's the truth. For whatever happened, whether it's in this case, it's not asylum seekers, it's having to have moved because of certain things, and your country has said come in and be here while you can, right? But without an acceptance from the people, the thing that forms the theme for this World Refugee Day, and I say, you know what, it's a human being like me that I could be in the same situation tomorrow. Do we find that there's an acceptance across board? Or when you went to school in Kenya, growing up here, did people treat you differently? Did people say, well, we have our own issues, we're not going to deal with that? It's the real stuff, isn't it, DEO?
Yeah.
Do we find now that there actually is acceptance, or are we saying now we are moving forward and saying community actually has to plug in here?
I will boldly say that generally you will never tell, in most times you'll never tell that someone is a refugee until when there's an issue of production of documents. A document is required. Generally, everyone moves about minding their business, selling, trying to get the daily bread. But then when now it comes to service provision, where that requires documents, that's where or maybe someone is arrested, that's when someone says, you're actually not Kenyan. Because you'll never tell that, even with the kids born here, most of them speak the local language. If you're born in Kikuyu land, you speak Kikuyu. If you're born in Western, you probably speak the host community language due to the integration. Even when growing up, children are not really able to distinguish that. They'll probably say, you're from Congo, you're from Burundi, maybe because of your name, but there isn't that really discrimination. I think for a refugee, you start feeling it when you now grow. When you now want maybe to start a family, get a job, when maybe you need a work permit, because we also have that challenge when you're seeking employment and you're required for a work permit. So generally, there is that harmony at community level, whereby it's everyone helping each other, us living in harmony together, transacting together, doing business together. Even intermarriages, we have a lot of intermarriages between the host community and the refugees, a lot of it. I've gone to more than 5 weddings whereby a Kenyan is married to a wedding and vice versa. So I think the conversation is now helping the host community understand at a deeper level what are the challenges that refugees go through actually, so that they don't assume that it's election, why are you not voting? Because there are times you are asked, oh, why are you not voting? You should come on board. Even we've had conversations with the Nairobi County on the importance of having refugees join the various initiatives by the government. We have the public participations. I'm personally part of the Nairobi Budget Champions, a group that brings on board both refugees and host communities in discussing budget, the Nairobi, the annual budgets, all these budget frameworks that are in the county. We're taking part in the barazas, the chief meetings at the different locations. And now I'll say that in the past years it was actually really hard, but I say that advocacy is a powerful tool. We have been speaking of refugee inclusion at all sectors, at all ministries, at all conversations. We have a popular saying that goes by, nothing for refugees without refugees. So we don't want people to sit in a room and decide on how to manage refugees, and there's no refugee representation in those rooms. So I think so far so good, but we are still pushing, and it's not a one-man's job. Yeah,
Philip. So when you talk about integration, communities working together with refugees, there are hindrances that do exist that make this integration plan just difficult. So then one would ask, what then must be done for all these barriers and bottlenecks that do exist to be removed so that the integration process is easier?
So, first of all, to begin with, we have a current population of over 840,000 refugees living in Kenya. 330,000 in Kakuma, about 440,000 in Dadaab, and then we have 102 scattered across the urban centers in Kenya. So with the increasing number of populations and Sudan still at war, Somali people still flowing in, the DRC situation, these numbers are not going to reduce anytime soon. And we have people who've lived in Kenya for like over 30 years, and people also, refugees also, who've been born in Kenya and no other country, and no other country. So with that, there comes also the strain on infrastructure and resources, especially with the host counties, and they struggle with the pressure of also providing the health, education, and also health, education, and other services to their own population. Now imagine the county government of Turkana now has to provide for an extra 330 populations, and then also with that number also there's been overload of also administrative overload. So there is that backlog in terms of registering these refugees, and a lot of them now go without documents, and then now with lack of documents they are unable to access services, and it comes also with being also arbitrarily arrested because you can't explain why you're in the country because you also don't have a document, and then also we've had the also issues with food insecurity, the reduction in food rations, and also the reduction in food rations. So the opportunities that this presents still is it has presented the opportunities for the country and also for UNHCR to just sit back and look at how do we move from being donor dependent to being creating avenues for more self-reliance. So that's why we are coming up with that's why for the recent number of years there's been the Kenya Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework that realizes that these people are here to stay for a long time. So let's start working on solutions, local solutions to socially and economically include them so that they're able to be self-reliant and reduce the donor strain. So we have policies such as Shirika Plan that has now come to just give guidelines as to how to also include both refugees and host communities into social service delivery, into development. And then it has also given room for more area-based coordination now with the county governments of Turkana and Garissa now moving, sitting back and saying that these people are with us for a long time. So how do we integrate them into our county structure? So they've come up with the GISEDEP, Garissa Integrated Social Economic Development development plan that is in its first phase that guides on how to share resources between also refugees and host communities. And then the same, we have the same in also Kakuma, the Kalobeye Integrated Social Development Plan that is in its second phase. And then nationally we have Shirika Plan. And then also there's also been it has also given given us also the opportunity to also realize barriers that exist to socio-economic inclusion, such as the barriers to accessing work permits and accessing business. So it creates also, because of the clamor for also the call for self-reliance, it has also created for us the opportunities to also advocate for the removal of systematic barriers to things such as accessing work permits, so that these refugees can be able to get work and then work like normal Kenyans and not be able to depend on this aid. And then also with refugees coming in, also just tapping into their expertise, realizing that we have teachers in here, we have entrepreneurs, we have doctors. So how can we tap into that skill and look at them as not just a humanitarian challenge, but as national developmental opportunities? And then also recently, Kakuma and Dadaab were gazetted as municipalities because of the large number of populations there. So that also creates an opportunities for refugees to be integrated into municipal governance and also local planning and local development. So and also there's the talk about the creation of a national refugee database to be domiciled by the Department of Refugee Services. And what that does in turn is that it ensures that refugees are integrated into every other service that also Kenyans can attain to enable them also just achieve social economic reliance.
We can have these conversations, DEO, and we can look at it from policy, obviously, because we do that, and then also on the other social side of things. But then there's sometimes the ugly side of it that comes out, and we would be remiss if we didn't talk about it, whereby folks are saying, well, okay, a nation has its own problems. Why should we be dealing with issues of refugees? When will you get to the point where you say, okay, so you've stabilized, isn't it now time you start to think about things like repatriation? How do we answer such questions where we have nations who have ratified and agreed to certain protocols for implementation when it comes to the status of refugees, but the social side of things is where, citizens, that it's across board. It's not just in Kenya, it's in Ethiopia, it's in the European countries of Germany, France, everywhere where there's huge refugee communities, whereby they're saying, okay, so for how long will we do this? How do we answer to that, especially in light of today's theme, where it's the community who has the power to ensure that, the status is protected?
First of all, I'd like to thank the Kenyan government for the amazing work they have done as far as refugee management is concerned. And just on your question, this is where now the aspect of many partners and coming on board in refugee management, because if we leave it to the government alone, I mean, for sure it's really burdening. So we need everyone to come on board, the private sector, the community themselves. We need a lot of conversations at grassroots levels just to help understand the community that they can actually not become they are not seen as a burden. They are seen these are business people who can pay taxes. Just a perfect example, I usually like to use the United States, whereby they welcome people, and these people, they've helped in the growth of the country. So if we have systems that are able to just, a refugee just wants, they didn't come to the host country by their own will. It is a situation based. If things are well, they can always go back home. They just want peace, somewhere to sleep, to go to school, just do business and just live a normal life. If the systems are put in place such that they don't have to they don't require aid. They're able to just wake up in the morning, hustle like a normal citizen, and the ground is square fair. It's more or less who is more qualified, who is more skilled, who is able to get opportunities. And then we also emphasize on the spirit of collaboration, because we understand that there is power in collaboration even at the grassroots levels. So I think we just need to have a deeper conversation on this that has to start at grassroots levels, just to make sure that all members of the communities understand this importance of just welcoming refugees and just allowing them for to just survive,
Absolutely.
and do about their life. Yeah,
for sure. Thank you for grounding this conversation this morning. Thank you for giving the information in the way in which we can understand it a little bit better, and thank you for putting community as front and center. And we think about the struggle, but we also then commend, and I'm glad that we're able to do that, commend those communities and governments who've actually made sure that because of naturally occurring incidents in our world, that we can actually create spaces where we make it just a little bit better for other humans to live and interact. Thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for sharing with us this morning.
Asante.
The thank yous don't end. Thank you for being on Kenya's Biggest Conversation through this week, and the conversations must continue. We've talked this morning with Kamuzinzi, DEO and Philip Ogonda to close out the week in the Situation Room. Good morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.